Yeah, let's get started.
Gravitas, co-presented by
SBI Mutual Fund, a partner for life.
Chemistry That Matters, SABIC. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist. Driven by Kia Sonet, wild by design.
Ask anyone in India about made in China products and they'll tell you two things: cheap and unreliable. But you see, toys and clothes are one thing, vaccines quite another. So China is promising a vaccine in about 2 months from now. No global agency has verified it. Nobody knows about the trials, how they were conducted. We don't know that either. What we do know about is the vaccine makers. Both the leading companies are controversial and tainted. So our question to you is this: will you take a Chinese vaccine? And before you answer, do remember that China sold the world faulty test kits and equipment not very long ago, but countries across the world now seem ready to buy Chinese vaccines with Chinese loans. Xi Jinping wants you to believe it's his country's charity. Let me tell you, in the best case scenario, it's a sales pitch. In the worst case scenario, it's a debt trap. We'll tell you all about it, all about China's vaccine diplomacy. Also on the show tonight, is China laying optical fibers at the border? What is the use of optical fibers in a situation like this? We'll bring you a special report. Donald Trump has spoken. He says the earth will cool down. Science does not know it yet. His words. The US presidential election is turning into a very entertaining affair. Imran Khan has suggested castration for rapists in Pakistan as the country continues to protest 2 rape cases. And the makers of Fair and Lovely are caught in another controversy, this time for calling African hair the opposite of normal. We'll tell you all about it, but first, as always, Gravitas Global Headlines.
The global terror financing watchdog, the Financial Action Task Force, is meeting today to evaluate Pakistan's response to terrorism. Pakistan is yet to complete 13 of the 27 parameters. India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh addressed the lower house of the parliament on the India-China border row. The minister confirmed that the border row currently stands unresolved. He said India is ready for any response required at the LAC and is very serious about issues of sovereignty. In a bid to put pressure on China over the alleged Chinese repression of Muslims, the United States has banned a range of Chinese products made by forced labor in the Xinjiang region. The blocked items will include cotton, garments, hair products and electronics from 5 manufacturers in Xinjiang. The Asian Development Bank says that the economies of developing Asia will contract by 0.7% in 2020. The first contraction in nearly 6 decades. It said that the coronavirus has heaped economic pain on the once booming Asian economy. Britain has issued a new travel advisory on China, warning that its nationals may be at risk of arbitrary detention. This comes after several foreigners were held on various charges, including cases involving state secrets and national security. Poisoned Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has posted a photo from the Berlin hospital where he is recovering. In the post, Navalny says he can breathe on his own without any support. With climate change driving up Antarctic temperatures, scientists say the vast ancient ice sheet sitting atop Greenland has shed a whopping 113 square kilometer chunk of ice last month. Experts find the occurrence to be unnerving. For the first time, Beijing has confirmed the criminal detention of 12 Hong Kongers. They were accused of attempting to travel illegally to Taiwan by boat last month. The Hong Kongers are likely to face criminal charges, as China's foreign ministry accused them of indulging in separatism. Argentina superstar Lionel Messi has topped the Forbes list of the world's highest-earning footballers for 2020. The record six-time World Player of the Year, who failed with a bid to leave Barcelona earlier this month, had estimated earnings of $126 million. Messi's longtime rival Cristiano Ronaldo came in second with earnings of $117 million. While the Paris Saint-Germain duo of Neymar and Kylian Mbappe were third and fourth, respectively. Liverpool's Mohamed Salah was the highest-earning Premier League player in fifth place overall. World number 1 Dustin Johnson has been crowned the PGA Tour's Player of the Year for the 2019-2020 season. All members of the PGA Tour with 10 starts or more over the course of the truncated season were eligible to vote, and Johnson finished above the likes of Jon Rahm and Justin Thomas to win the Jack Nicklaus Award for the second time in his career, having also won in 2016. Johnson hit a purple patch after the season restart in June. He had 2 wins and 2 runner-up finishes before rounding off the campaign with victory at the season-ending Tour Championship to clinch the FedEx Cup.
I will begin tonight by showing you a set of pictures. This is a vaccine for the Wuhan virus. A vaccine made in China, the country that gave the world this virus, is now showing off the antidote, the possible antidote, purported. China released these pictures last week. Now it says that a Chinese vaccine could be ready as early as November 2020. In just 2 months from now, China says it will be ready to sell a vaccine. The question is, does it even work? Your guess is as good as mine. But here's the brutal truth. We are 9 months into this pandemic. We do not have a cure yet. And going by most reliable projections, reliable being the operative word, by most reliable projections, we won't have a vaccine before next year. Scientists are setting early 2021 as the deadline for a vaccine. It could take 4 years for the whole world to access it. But China says its vaccine should be ready in 2 months. China has already sold the world faulty test kits and PPE sets. Now it wants to sell a vaccine. So here's my question to all of you. Will you take a Chinese vaccine? One that is being produced by sidestepping rules and with the sole purpose of winning the race? If your answer is yes, then you must know this. Just like most things in China, very little is known about the Chinese vaccine. But we know a thing or two about the makers of these vaccines. And listen to this carefully. Before the pandemic, China's vaccine companies had lost the trust of Chinese citizens. Why? Because they sold ineffective vaccines and their officials took bribes. I have specific cases. Sinopharm. It is one of the Chinese companies in the vaccine race. It runs something called the Wuhan Institute of Biological Products. In 2018, this institute was involved in a scandal. Defective vaccines for diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough, and other conditions were injected into hundreds of thousands of babies. The institute was taken to court. In 2 cases, it was ordered to partially compensate the victims. The payout was around $71,500. And the list of controversies around China's vaccine makers is much longer than this. I have one more. This is about Sinovac, the other Chinese company that is making the Wuhan virus vaccine. From 2002 to 2014, a general manager from Sinovac bribed China's deputy director in charge of drug evaluations. He was paid nearly $50,000. This was in exchange for drug approvals. Let that sink in. They bought approvals with bribes. Sinopharm and Sinovac 2 Chinese companies with a sketchy track record. And these are the ones leading China's vaccine hunt. Would you take their vaccine? Good luck if you will. Despite the tainted track record, the Chinese media is promoting Sinopharm and Sinovac vaccines. First, we saw the images. Now we hear their claims. The latest one comes from China's Center for Disease Control and Prevention. An official there says the general public may be able to get their hands on the vaccine in November. Reports say China has 4 vaccines in the final stage of clinical trial. At least 3 have already been offered to essential workers. In July, China launched an emergency use program. It began administering the vaccine to essential workers. That's how China is trying to win the vaccine race, by disregarding global standards, conducting secret trials, and using the government workers as guinea pigs. Let me show you a report that came out in July. It says China offered its vaccine to employees of PetroChina. It is a state-owned oil giant, PetroChina. The government had 2 vaccines for emergency use at the time. It invited PetroChina workers to try them out so that they could, quote-unquote, protect themselves when working overseas on Belt and Road projects. It sounds like a noble idea, but it's Chinese. China is not protecting its citizens who travel overseas for work. It is using them for experiments, like I said, guinea pigs. PetroChina employees were given an unproven vaccine outside the official clinical trials. China has essentially extended a lab experiment to its people without a stamp of approval for any of its vaccines. It's not just unethical, it's dangerous. Who will be accountable if the vaccines lead to side effects? The Chinese state is backing this program, but will it take responsibility for any mishaps? That's a rhetorical question, because when does China ever take responsibility? The Wuhan virus is still waiting to be claimed. And now China wants to sell a vaccine. It wants to be the first one to give it to the world, to change the narrative, to portray itself as a savior. I'm not making this up. Xi Jinping has been saying this. Let me take you back to the month of May. Xi Jinping addressed the World Health Assembly and he said, and I quote, "COVID-19 vaccine development and deployment in China, when available, will be made a global public good. This will be China's contribution to ensuring vaccine accessibility and affordability in developing countries." That was a declaration of intent. On that day, Xi Jinping put it on record. He told the world that China was in the vaccine race. And to win it, they began secret trials. Government officials and citizens were given the unproven vaccine. Chinese drug maker Sinovac began administering its vaccine to thousands of employees. Some 3,000 employees got the jab. Another vaccine company, Sinopharm, went one step further. Senior officials and the chairman of this company took the vaccine. They're chasing a December deadline for the public rollout. Sinopharm has even announced the price. Less than 1,000 yuan, that's $147 for 2 doses. But beyond the borders of China, these vaccines have got no approvals. Even the WHO, that tends to lean towards China, will not give its stamp of approval. The World Health Body wants to see proof first. For a change, they've asked for scientific evidence that the Chinese vaccine actually works. But none of this has deterred Beijing. The vaccines are being used at home and China is even selling them abroad. We have a list of deals that China has struck so far. The Philippines will have quick access to a Chinese coronavirus vaccine. China is offering loans for vaccines, a whole new chapter in its debt diplomacy. China will give $1 billion as loans to Latin America and Caribbean nations. This is not just to buy a Chinese, this is in fact just to buy a Chinese vaccine. When Xi Jinping says public good, you should know it's a sales pitch, or worse, a debt trap. Then we have Bangladesh. It has been promised more than 100,000 free doses from a Chinese company. In return, Sinovac has been allowed to run vaccine trials in Bangladesh. Another company, Sinopharm, we just spoke about, it has dispatched a team to Peru. They are recruiting up to 6,000 volunteers for trials there. The world right now is desperate for a vaccine, we know that, and smaller countries have little choice. So they are taking what China offers. Take the case of Indonesia. It is locked in a territorial dispute with China in the South China Sea, but Indonesia wants a vaccine from China. 15 days ago, its president, Joko Widodo, spoke to Xi Jinping over the phone. The Chinese president assured him. Here's a statement from Beijing. It says, China takes seriously Indonesia's concerns and needs in vaccine cooperation. Another South China Sea rival, the Philippines, wants a vaccine from China. President Rodrigo Duterte made a plea to Xi Jinping in the month of July. He even ruled out confronting Beijing in the South China Sea just to secure a vaccine. Needless to say, China is happy to oblige. It will prioritize the Philippines. China has offered vaccines to Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, Middle East and South Asia. And make no mistake, this is not philanthropy and kindness, public good as the Chinese call it. This is vaccine diplomacy. China tried something like this with the Wuhan virus supplies. We all know how that went. Countries around the world complained about faulty supplies. China tried to shut them up, threaten them, run propaganda, but the truth got out. And China's supplies were unceremoniously returned. Now it's back with a vaccine. China wants to give it, but terms and conditions apply. Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia and the Philippines will have to stop challenging China, especially on the South China Sea issue. By taking its vaccines abroad, China is securing heft and compliance. Let me tell you what happened today. The UAE became the first country outside China to approve Chinese vaccines. Abu Dhabi has approved the emergency use of the Sinopharm vaccine. The company was running trials alongside a local partner in the UAE. So here's another question. Should we dismiss Chinese vaccines altogether? That's a call for scientists to make. But on the global stage, we can tell you, transparency and data sharing is everything. Until China shares the data, until it becomes transparent about its vaccine program, the worth of its Wuhan virus vaccines remains unproven. So if you're offered a Chinese vaccine for free, proceed at your own risk. Which brings us to the obvious next question. What are the options? There are more than 150 vaccine candidates around the world right now. It's a crowded field. Many of them will never make it out of the laboratory. But the leading candidates are defying medical norms. They're promising a safe and efficient vaccine by the end of this year. Here's a roundup of the leading vaccine candidates and how they're faring in clinical trials.
Leading the COVID-19 vaccine race is AstraZeneca, a British-Swedish multinational. But last week, the company hit a major roadblock. Its trials were halted after a British trial volunteer developed serious side effects. The company called it a routine pause. After a sweeping review, the UK trials have resumed. But authorities in the US and India are yet to give the go-ahead. Pfizer and BioNTech are expanding their Stage 3 clinical trials. That is, if the US Food and Drug Administration approves. The companies are on track to meet their initial target of 30,000 volunteers by next week. Late-stage trial results are expected by October, but it could take months before the vaccine is declared safe. US-based Moderna Therapeutics is all set to begin its Phase 3 trials. The company is in talks with multiple countries to meet its target of 30,000 volunteers. Expect a full-scale rollout by the end of 2020. The target is to produce 1 billion doses per year from 2021. Russia's Sputnik 5 is the only vaccine in civil circulation. 250 Moscow residents received it last week. 75% of them are yet to display symptoms. Small consignments of Sputnik 5 are being shipped across the country. But safety concerns remain. A group of eminent scientists recently raised doubts about the accuracy of Russia's clinical trials. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
And we're not done with China yet. Reports claim China is laying a network of optical fiber cables along the border, close to the flashpoint areas with India. The question is, why does the PLA need super fast internet at the line of actual control? This report has the answer.
Every soldier who has fought a war in the 20th century is familiar with this sound. To a civilian, this system of dots, dashes and spaces may not make much sense. But for militaries, the Morse code was the lifeline for years. It was perhaps the only way to exchange intelligence securely and speedily. But the internet has changed everything, including how militaries fight battles. The PLA is embracing the digital age. It is building technology and deploying it on the front. Case in point, the border standoff with India. A report by news agency Reuters claims that China is laying fiber optic cables to flashpoint areas. Fiber optics are long, thin strands of pure glass. They encode data into pulses of light and transfer anything, anywhere across the world. Fiber optics are the foundation of high-speed internet. And Chinese soldiers are getting these cables close to their positions at the LAC. Reports say Indian officials have noticed these cables at different locations in Pangong Tso, the area that is at the center of this border standoff. China could be laying these cables for two reasons. One, to enable high-speed communication with troops at the border. Two, to protect its communications from leaks.
Alpha 1 for Alpha 2, Alpha 2, Alpha 2 1.
The Indian forces still use radios to communicate. Exchanges on an optical fiber network are said to be more secure. But Beijing denies laying out any cables.
Questions from AFP here.
据我所知，有关报道不属实。
China seems to have more sophisticated tech gear up its sleeve. An open-source intelligence company has published these images. It shows Chinese soldiers using unmanned aerial vehicles or UAVs. The pictures were broadcast by the Chinese state television broadcaster CCTV on the 10th of September. These soldiers are stationed at the Tibet military district, which is close to China's border with India. These photographs have triggered intense speculation. Reports say the PLA could be using UAVs to provide rapid logistical support to troops in the field. The internet was started as a military experiment in the United States. Now China wants to use it as a weapon. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Are you using a Chinese phone? If yes, chances are that all your personal data on that Chinese phone is being stored in China, meaning China has access to your personal life. It can read your messages. It can listen to your phone calls, access your video calls. These are not my words. These are the words of the man who has exposed China's data theft and hybrid warfare. Yesterday, we told you about Chinese snooping on 10,000 Indian individuals and organizations. Today, we decided to find out more about the extent of this tracking. So earlier this evening, I spoke to Professor Christopher Balding. He is an associate professor at the Fulbright University in Vietnam, but right now he's in America thanks to Chinese threats. I asked him what China is looking for on Indian phones and what India can do to safeguard its digital borders. Listen to what he told me. Professor Balding, welcome to Beyond, and many congratulations for your big expose.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
This database that was leaked has 2.4 million names and profiles. That's a lot of profiles. What specifically was China looking for?
It appears that they are targeting their standard types of influence types of outlets. We see lots of politicians, the families of politicians, academics, leaders in technology, ex-military personnel. And one of the things that I think surprised us was the number of organized crime figures that we see in the database, which was a little bit shocking. But the way to think of it generally is people of influence. We saw religious leaders, we saw all kinds of people in the database.
And the company which created the database, according to you, is linked with the Chinese government. How do you come to that conclusion?
Yes, so basically we did very deep research, for instance, on the individuals that work for the company, the individuals that started the company, the individuals that sit on the board of directors of the company, who their clients are, who appears to be accessing the data. And we say with a very high degree of confidence that their primary client base is absolutely the Chinese military, state, intelligence, and security services.
One of the analysts has described this database as Cambridge Analytica on steroids. Do you agree with that description?
I think that's a very accurate description because it's taking not just Facebook data, but it is taking many different types of data and compiling it into like one super database so that it can get a very clear profile of if it wants to influence in the Indian technology sector, Indian politicians at all levels throughout society. It really presents a very clear picture of how to influence India or Indian individuals.
So from what I've read, this information that has been collected includes dates of birth, addresses, marital status, along with photographs, political associations, relatives, social media. It is collated Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok accounts, criminal records, corporate misdemeanors, news stories. Is this all information from open source material, or have they been able to access the specific details of text chats and audio and video calls?
So we don't see evidence of what you're referring to in this specific database. We do have other databases that would seem to indicate that the Chinese government has access to at least metadata from Indian text messages, telephone calls, voice over internet protocols, things of that nature.
And you're saying that the Chinese government has access to the same number of people, this bigger database for people who have whose phone accounts have been compromised and whose chats and call details can be accessed by the hackers?
That's correct. In other databases, we see evidence of Chinese companies or the Chinese government having access to phone logs, things of that nature. That's correct, yes.
So for a layperson, if I were to ask you, Professor Balding, to describe how damaging can this kind of data theft be for the target?
So I think what it appears to show is basically how they're drawing up lists of who they want to influence or target for either everything from influence operations, meaning what is a policy think tank, who is maybe somebody that works in the government that we need to influence. This data can also be used to draw up, intelligence targeting. One of the things that surprised us was the number of low-level military personnel. Well, the only reason you would target low and mid-level military personnel is if you believe that you could use them as an intelligence target. And that seems to be one of the things that is in this database is large amounts of that type of personnel.
Xinhua boasts that it has about 20 collection nodes scattered around the world to get all of this data and send it back to China. Have all of these nodes been detected and neutralized?
I can't say that we've identified all of them. We've definitely identified some of them. And my understanding is that has been passed on to relevant authorities in those countries. One of the primary reasons Xinhua appears to be doing that is basically to evade detection as a Chinese data collection agency, so that the data appears to be being taken to South Korea, for instance, was one that we noticed. So that appears to be the reason they're doing that.
Until 2018, you worked at the Peking University, but you left China citing fears for your physical safety. Now you have squarely put China in the dock. Are you worried about your safety?
In a lot of ways, not really. I've also left Vietnam. I was actually advised by people representing a couple different governments that it would be advisable for me to leave Vietnam. But I think, you know, that's something that that you need to do, recognizing when you take on these types of stories with regards to China. And I think China needs to be held account for what it's doing.
And bear with me if my questions sound too simplistic, but I think that's what the average viewer would want to know. Now that this this data collection and data theft is out in the open, does it mean it has stopped? Or are these so-called foreign targets still on the radar of the Chinese and their phones are still being followed?
I think they're absolutely still being followed. And I think one of the key issues is for individuals and institutions in India and around the world that are going to be targets of China to recognize their vulnerabilities, to recognize that they are targets of Chinese influence operations, and for governments to recognize that this is how China is behaving, and how can we address this as countries that are worried about democratic states.
So we are saying that the Indian army thwarted the Chinese military at the border, but they seem to have invaded our digital borders. What can India do to secure its digital society?
Sure. So let me give you one example. I was in India a couple years ago, and one of the things I noticed was how ubiquitous Chinese phones were throughout the Indian population. If you actually look at what we call the end user license agreement, if you use a Chinese phone, all of the data that is on that Chinese phone is likely being stored in China. And so that means that most Indian personal data, if it's on that phone, is likely being stored in China. So the type of thing that the Indian government may want to revisit is what are the data privacy, security, and localization laws that are influencing the data storage of Indian consumers.
Thank you very much, Professor Balding, and we hope to speak to you later as well as more details of this very, very important investigation come out. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Let's now discuss the U.S. presidential race. As America inches closer to the day of voting, climate change is increasingly becoming a hot topic. There are colossal wildfires raging through California, Oregon, and the state of Washington. They're turning the heat on the presidential campaigns. Both Joe Biden and Donald Trump have laid out their vision to tackle this natural disaster, but the contrast between the two couldn't have been more stark. And before I tell you how, let me share some quick facts with you. 4.5 million acres of land has been burnt since August. 6,200 homes and structures have been destroyed. 3 million more homes are at the risk of being ravaged. 36 lives have been lost. Some 64,000 people have been forced to evacuate. The air quality has worsened. The skies have taken eerie tones of orange and sepia. It is a crisis of epic proportions. How are the presidential candidates responding? What promises are they making? I'll start with the man in charge right now, Donald Trump. He has never really been a believer in climate change. He's called it a hoax. But the scale of this natural disaster, has Donald Trump concerned this time, perhaps, or the election has? Either way, he landed in California for a briefing about the wildfires. Present at the briefing were officials from different political backgrounds, including Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, and Wade Crowfoot, the secretary of California Natural Resources Agency. These two men tried cornering Trump over climate change. They urged him to understand the science behind wildfires. How did the president react? Well, you have to watch it to believe it.
If we ignore that science and sort of put our head in the sand and think it's all about vegetation management, we're not going to succeed together protecting Californians.
Okay. It'll start getting cooler. You just watch.
I wish science agreed with you.
Hey, well, I don't think science knows.
I don't think science knows, he says. This is the same president who said the Wuhan virus will disappear when the months get hotter. He's now hopeful that the fires will disappear when things start getting cooler. Somewhere between these hot and cool promises, logic has turned into stone and is dying a painful death. What about Trump's challenger, the gaffe-prone Joe Biden? What does he make of these wildfires? Well, he thinks Donald Trump is the one setting them. Speaking in Delaware, Biden called Trump a climate arsonist. Let's listen to his logic as well.
If you give a climate arsonist 4 more years in the White House, why would anyone be surprised if we have more America ablaze? If you give a climate denier 4 more years in the White House, why would anyone be surprised when more of America is underwater? We need a president who respects science, who understands that the damage from climate change is already here. And unless we take urgent action, it will soon be more catastrophic.
We need a president who respects science, said Joe Biden. Too bad the bugs in Delaware did not seem to agree. They kept disturbing Biden's speech. They sometimes landed on his shoulder and sometimes on his face. Biden passed it off as an omen.
The brunt falls disproportionately on communities of color, exacerbating the need for environmental justice. Sorry, as a bug. Speaking of the environment.
Speaking of bugs, according to a security researcher at App Analyst, a privacy bug in Joe Biden's campaign app may have exposed the personal information of millions of Americans. Allow me to explain how. A feature in the Vote Joe app allows users to sync their contacts with the app to see if their friends and family have also registered to vote. So when it finds a match, this app displays the person's name, age, date of birth, and a list of recent elections they voted in. And this is where the problem lies. This particular feature can provide a person's information by simply creating a contact with a person's full name, irrespective of their phone number or email ID. The Democratic Party says this bug has been fixed, but questions are being raised on whether this bug was intentionally placed. The controversy is expected to get bigger. Which brings us back to the Trump campaign. They're also struggling with their controversies. The latest one is gaining mileage through a hashtag #PedoTrump. It's been trending in America. It was first used by MidasTouch.com, a left-wing political organization. It put out a video along with this hashtag. What was in this video? A compilation of brief snippets from Trump's relationship with convicted pedophile billionaire Jeffrey Epstein. It included Trump's statements on the man himself, how he was a lot of fun to be with, and how he liked beautiful women on the younger side. There were also remarks that Trump made about his daughters, Tiffany and Ivanka. The video has gone viral. It has received more than 2 million views. Take a look.
Prince Andrew answering questions for the first time about his friendship with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
I don't know Prince Andrew, but it's a tough story.
Trump has been photographed with Prince Andrew as far back as the year 2000.
Ghislaine Maxwell is accused of helping Epstein sexually abuse underage girls.
I've met her numerous times over the years, especially since I lived in Palm Beach, and I guess they lived in Palm Beach. But I wish her well.
You know about sexual predators and things like that. I mean,
you are one.
All right, I was going to say that. But
So here's the bottom line. Joe Biden and Donald Trump, they've both been accused of indecent behavior towards women. Presidential character has become a key factor in this election. And the women of America, the men too, have a tough choice to make. Which brings us to another country that's also heading for an election, Myanmar. Polls in less than 2 months from now, in November. The Wuhan virus crisis in the country has intensified. Hospitals in the biggest city are overwhelmed. Opposition parties want to push the election date. Guess what the government is busy doing? It is stepping up military deployment on the border with Bangladesh. Dhaka is worried. This report tells you why.
Polls in Myanmar are slated for the 8th of November. A crucial test for the country's first democratic government in half a century. But the country has to first pass a different test. For the electoral battle to take place, the country must defeat an invisible enemy, the Wuhan virus. In 1 month, deaths have tripled, infections have shot up by 700%, new infections are doubling every week. Several members of the State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi's office have tested positive. The government has confirmed the leader is in good health. Myanmar has one of the world's poorest healthcare systems. Hospitals in the biggest city, Yangon, are overwhelmed. Opposition parties want the election to be postponed. The People's Pioneer Party has called for a delay to allow the vote to be held fairly and without chaos. Local media reports say at least 3 other parties back the call. Commercial hub Yangon, capital Naypyidaw, and conflict-stricken Rakhine State are all under lockdown. Neighbours China and Thailand are boosting security on the shared borders to prevent the spread. After detecting several new cases in the Chinese border city of Ruili, China announced a lockdown. Thailand has increased military presence on its border. Myanmar is doing the same, but for a different reason. Myanmar has deployed over 2,500 additional troops near the Bangladesh border. In camps along the Rakhine and Chin states' western border, the government says this is to suppress the Arakan army, which it calls a terrorist group. The deployment comes after 2 meetings last week. Officers from the 3 Myanmar armed forces, the Army, the Navy and the Air Force were present. Bangladesh is concerned. It summoned the Myanmar ambassador in Dhaka. What does Bangladesh fear? A new round of killings and torture in Rakhine or Chin state, like the one in 2017. This could trigger another exodus. Myanmar is under the global scanner. The UN Security Council has urged it to ensure the participation of the Rohingyas in the election. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
The makers of Fair and Lovely have a rather unfair and dark record. Unilever has drawn enough criticism for its fairness cream, and now, in the middle of an anti-racism movement, it has released a new ad branding African hair as frizzy and dull. Blonde hair, on the other hand, it says, is quote-unquote normal hair. The result is this: major South African retailers have taken a popular Unilever shampoo off their shelves. There have been protests, vandalism and sacking. Here's a report.
Who gets to define beauty? Who gets to set beauty standards? Who gets to tell you what is fine and what isn't? FMCG brands think it is them. How else do you explain this ad? African hair is frizzy and dull. It is also dry and damaged. Blonde hair is normal. Really? Who came up with this ad? Tresemme. In India, the brand normally promises salon-like hair at home. In South Africa, Tresemme is promising normal hair. Its target audience, black women. Tresemme is promising normal hair to them. What it is also doing is normalizing racism. South Africans are angry, and rightly so. They protested the ad and the store that featured it. Shops were vandalized, employees were sacked, and finally, South Africa's biggest retailers said they will no longer sell Tresemme hair products. Let's look at the pocket pinch. The insensitive ad has cost Tresemme a hair care market of 55 million people. The brand has decided to remove all products from the market for 10 days. Wait, did we tell you who owns Tresemme? Unilever, a British-Dutch company. The same FMCG company that has been promising fair and lovely skin to people of colour for decades now. In a statement on the Tresemme fiasco, Unilever said, "The company set out to celebrate the beauty of all hair types and the range of the solutions Tresemme offers. But we got it wrong. This blatant racism isn't a one-off case. Unilever has a dark history. And we are not even punning. In 2017, these ads showed black women turning white after using Dove products. Unilever told women of colour that they would see visibly more beautiful skin in just 1 week. When they were bashed for the ad, Unilever said it quote-unquote missed the mark in representing women of colour thoughtfully. Unilever is not alone in this shady marketing gimmick. Every other brand out there is making black people feel less beautiful. This particular ad of a Chinese detergent takes the cake. Didn't see that coming, did you? Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Let's talk about Pakistan. After days of protests over rising crimes against Pakistani women, Prime Minister Imran Khan has finally broken his silence. In a recent interview, he presented a plan to protect the women of his country. He has promised a full-fledged crackdown on rapists and sex offenders. He says his government is working on a national register. They will track such people. This register will work on a grading system where sexual crimes will be classified into first, second and third degrees, just like murder. For first-degree crimes, Imran Khan says the culprit should be chemically castrated for scarring the lives of victims. And reports say his ministers are already drafting a bill for this. Listen to this.
जो मैं उसके बाद समझता हूँ इसकी कैस्ट्रेशन होनी चाहिए, केमिकल कैस्ट्रेशन. अब ये कई मुल्कों के अंदर मैं पढ़ रहा हूँ, तो उनको या सर्जरी करें कि वो आगे से कुछ कर ही ना सके.
जो रिपीट ऑफेंडर है,
जो देखे ना, जिस तरह मर्डर होता है फर्स्ट डिग्री, सेकंड डिग्री, थर्ड डिग्री, उसी तरह इसको भी ग्रेड करें. और जो फर्स्ट डिग्री हो उसको तो कैस्ट्रेशन करें, यानी उनको कभी भी, यानी उनको आप ऑपरेशन करके उनको नकारा करके रख दें.
Such righteousness. Why doesn't Pakistan show the same seriousness for punishing terrorists? There are a total of 40,000 of them living in this country. Yesterday we told you how these terrorists are running recruitment drives, issuing threats, delivering sermons, openly calling for jihad. Will the Imran Khan government punish them? We know the answer, so we'll not push the point. Will the government then also punish police officials who shame rape victims on national television, like the Lahore police chief? He blamed a rape victim for stepping out late at night and for being French in her orientation and mentality, his words. Then we come to Pakistani clerics like Maulana Tariq Jamil, publicly shaming women for the way they dress and the way they behave. This cleric even blamed the pandemic on quote-unquote scantily dressed women. How about punishing such clerics too? The list doesn't end there. A prominent Pakistani leader, Senator Rehman Malik, has been accused of raping American national Cynthia Ritchie. The victim shared her plight in June last year. In the months that followed, Pakistani politicians from different parties shamed her for speaking up. What has the Imran Khan government done? It has asked this American national to leave their country. The Interior Ministry of Pakistan has refused to extend her visa. This is how the Pakistan government delivers justice to rape victims. And I'm not done yet. Imran Khan himself has been accused of inappropriate behavior towards women. In 2017, a lawmaker from Imran Khan's own party, Tehreek-e-Insaf, accused the Prime Minister of harassing women. Her name is Aisha Gulalai. She accused Imran Khan of sending her obscene text messages and sexually harassing her on several occasions. She faced a wave of abuse by Imran Khan's followers and she was subsequently forced to quit the party. It's been 3 years and she's still waiting for justice. Which degree of crime will Imran Khan classify himself into for these accusations? The point I'm making is simple. It's easy to make tall promises to gain political mileage, but very tough to reform a crippled system and society of which you are a part. Imran Khan is making these statements only to douse the anger. With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.